Ward. I'm the regional manager for Intermap, and I'm here with Ivo Banovsky, who's our director of risk management products. So his vertical responsibility intersects my horizontal responsibility in Toronto. So we're both here, and joining us today is Ian Grady, our agent for British Columbia. So we're just, what are we going to do today? We're just going to say very few words about Intermap and IFSAR, this interferometric synthetic aperture radar technology that we use. We won't get you bogged down in the technical details. I'll tell you why it's important in terms of risk management and give you some examples of some work we've done in Europe, and then reach some conclusions and hopefully answer any questions you have.
These slides will be available?
And this will all be on a PDF that you can download this afternoon if you'd like. So our company is started off in Calgary. We're still traded on the Toronto Exchange just down the street. In '97, we licensed this technology that we currently use from Environmental Research Institute of Michigan. They had developed it under some government funding, U.S. government funding, and they had wanted to come up with a system that you could put in an aircraft and make one pass over an area that was totally cloud covered and come away with an image and an elevation model. And the system does that, and we've been incrementally improving it since then. And we've used that technology to do some of the largest mapping projects in the world to date. So just as about a year and a half ago, we finished up mapping the 21 countries in Western Europe, as well as all the continental U.S. We actually go about 10 miles into Canada, but unfortunately no further than that. So. And then I need to point it. We're currently doing a lot of work in Indonesia, Malaysia, Australia, discussing a project in Thailand. So we try to focus on what's called the cloud belt, where these are parts of the world where it would be very difficult to employ aerial photography, for example. You'd spend the rest of your life trying to get cloud-free imagery of a place like Indonesia, where we'll go up and fly at night, collect data through the clouds, and it's a very effective technology in this region. So this is there's not 37 slides on IFSAR, there's one slide, so relax. It's what's called an active sensor. We don't rely on sunlight reflecting on the surface of the Earth to take a photograph. This aircraft has two radar systems in it that are antennae that are about a meter apart on it, and they're sending radar beams down to the surface of the Earth and collecting the reflected information. And it's the difference between what's collected on the one antenna versus the other antenna that enables us to derive elevation data. And then we're going to get into why elevation data is important in flood risk management. And the whole thing has got a very sophisticated positioning system, because to know where the data is, you need to know where you collected it from. So it's got airborne GPS and inertial measurement systems in it and all sorts of stuff I could bore you with for hours, but won't. But trust me that it works. So. And from that data, we're able to build three different types of products. One is it's called an Ortho rectified radar image. And in North America, where there's lots and lots of aerial photography and many iterations of it, this is not a product of great interest. In places like Malaysia and Indonesia, there's absolutely no aerial photography, so getting an image, clear, orthorectified or precise image of the ground is a huge deal. The other two products we make from that is what's called the digital surface model and digital terrain model. And here's the difference between the two. You can see that the roughness on this digital surface model, that's reflectance off the surface. So everything there, be it vegetation, what's called cultural features or buildings, other things are all shown up. We edit that off using, I think we've got 150 people that do 3D editing over in Jakarta. Edit that off and end up with a very clean digital terrain model. Yes, sir.
So they're actively editing that off, like going in and deleting these things. They're not using like an interpolation model or anything like that.
Well, there is some software that does much of it, but to get it to be the best quality elevation model possible, there's probably 8 hours of editing that goes into one of the map sheets. So it's a very, very much of a hands-on process.
Kind of half and half between sort of
I would
interpolating and
say that's a
actually
reasonable
actively doing
assumption,
it.
yes.
Okay.
Just a quick illustration, this is what you typically would see in a 30-meter resolution elevation model. And this is what we're able to move to with our technology. Quite dramatic improvement, and where you're able to define features like river courses and channels in greater detail, you can just do a much better job of analyzing what water's going to be in those areas. And so this is our current Ortho rectified radar image, which is about 0.6 meters each pixel size, each picture element in that, and it's got a very high level of detail. At this point, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Ivo, he's been our flood risk and risk director for a number of years, and he's probably got about 15 years of experience in this particular application of elevation data. So,
thank you, David, for the introduction. And I will have one last comment to the elevation data and XR technology, and then I will move into the flood modeling, and I'm not just going to explain the flood modeling, but I will be trying to give you a context. So links, what is actually related to the flood modeling, flood hazard mapping, and how this is impacting the insurance business, reinsurance business, what are the applications and ways of how elevation data and topography in general can improve decisions and actually make life a little bit more predictable, at least in terms of the natural catastrophes. The last comment I wanted to make regarding the XR technology is that we have seen those 3 layers, and the most important component which is used for flood mapping is the digital terrain model, DTM. And this is the bare earth model, which does not have the artifacts, vegetation, buildings, bridges, all that stuff in, and can be used for the hydraulic and hydrologic modeling. So this would be the component which, if I'm saying elevation data for the rest of the presentation, I mean this without the artifacts on the elevation data set. So what are the challenges we currently see in the market, not only insurance, but also government and other markets, is that with the technology, how the technology is advancing, we are usually facing a situation that the solution is needed now. We do not have time to develop something in 2 years or 3 years, but the businesses are looking for information and solutions now, today, or yesterday, if we have today a flood. Another thing is that with the internet technologies and web-based applications, we do not need to have the top solution in the first release, but we need to get a solution which is answering the questions reliably, and we can improve it over time. We can make improvements, improve the accuracy on our detail as we are using the application. Another challenge which is coming with the global perspective, we are not anymore looking only at small places like cities or counties or states. The perspective is really global. And example from the reinsurance perspective, the focus is on national markets or even continents. From insurance perspective, usually it's at least state, but usually it's more because insurance companies are thinking also more globally. So we are not anymore able to work only with the information which is available for small regions. And of course, no one wants to get something reinvented. So reusing information which has been in place for some time, if it's useful and reliable, should be reused. We do not want to do something again and spend additional time and effort in doing something again. How this is relating to the elevation data? If you imagine, for example, Europe, because that's where I will be trying to bring some of the examples from. My professional life has been much more focusing on the European market and working with European insurance companies and reinsurers rather than North American. So I'm not going to touch that much of the flood events you had in Canada or US. You had that yesterday. I will be trying to give you examples from Europe to give you different perspective. And if then you have any time questions, just jump in and we can bring in also the North American perspective in, but it's not included that much in the slides. So the big issue we see in topography or elevation data mapping is that historically, as it was moving from the local perspective to the global perspective, the elevation data which are available and have been available historically are just small patches of data, and the quality is increasing over the time, so we have really different data sets available for the bigger territory, and at the end, it's just looking like this type of pillow. Different data, different quality, different methodology used, and if you take this and run a hydraulic modeling, the result is strange, because in one of those species, the water can flow downhill, and then there is a step, and the water cannot flow anymore. So you have very big issues in working with this type of non-homogeneous data sets. And we have been taking that as a, let's say, one of the key goals for our IPSAR and NextMap data, because if you want to do nationwide modeling, you really need to get rid of those, let's say, local data sets and create a homogeneous data set, which is hydrologically correct. And this is actually the, I would say, key idea which we have been trying to introduce through our NextMap. We call it NextMap, and it's actually homogeneous data set, which is not necessarily having the highest accuracy everywhere, but it's homogeneous, so you can run the large-scale modeling efforts, and the results are much more reliable than the local very detailed data. And what that means from the practical perspective, just to give you an example, we have been running several projects and studies, and the goal was to understand actually what are the issues if you are trying to integrate elevation data created by IPSAR technology, the technology we are using, the radar, and data which are created using different approach, laser scan, LiDAR. Those data sets are more detailed, more accurate, significantly bigger in terms of volume, data volume, and just two different data sets. And the different industries has been telling us, we need to use LiDAR. And we said that's not really making sense, because it's really hard to work with the data set. Yes, it is more accurate. It can be very used for local kind of civil engineering tasks and things which require really very detailed accuracy. Because if we talk about LiDAR, the vertical accuracy is around 25-30 centimeters in average. Sometimes it goes to 15, but let's take 30. If you take IPSAR, we would be at 35-40 up to 1 meter. So this is the difference in accuracy. And of course, if you see LiDAR data set, you can see vegetation and grass and all that stuff, which is making such a noise in the data that you need to handle that somehow. So the goal of this study was, let's try to use those two data sets, fuse them together, and see if we can improve IFSAR or LiDAR, or if the fused product is actually better. And we have been a little bit expecting that LiDAR will be the winner in terms of accuracy, but we have been very positively surprised at the end. I'll show you the results. So what you see here is the LiDAR acquisition, very detailed data set, which unfortunately is not covering this part of the map, and LiDAR is not reflecting that well on the water surface. So there are pieces of the data missing. So what would need to be done in order to run proper flood modeling, you need to get those data sets, those missing parts somewhere, and that's what we actually did. We used our IFSAR technology and merged those data sets together, and this type of result can be used for flood modeling because it covers the territory. You can put the water on the elevation data and see how the water actually leaves the territory. And the result was very interesting because we, by running this study, also with some of the FEMA contractors, so it was done in Australia, this one, the result was if you merge IFSAR data and LiDAR data, the result is better than those two data sets on its own. Because the IFSAR data set is homogeneous and can help to position the very detailed data sets on a kind of common basis. And of course, it fills in the areas which are not covered because of the LiDAR technology. And one more example here is showing that the LiDAR data set has a lot of noise, which needs to be handled in the processing and flood modeling, compared to IFSAR, which is much more consistent and it's reflecting, for example, the water surface is much better and can be efficiently used for fast and detailed.
What does merging mean? Trying to pick up on Mark's comment earlier. Does that mean someone sits at a computer and one dot at a time chooses between two observations or edits things or whatever?
It's a good question because it's very much related to the editing. As we are doing the editing, it's currently, I would say, in average 150 people in our Jakarta production center. They have 3D stations, which means glasses, two screens, and they see the data in really 3D view. And the process which is used for editing, which means from the raw data from the aircraft, the DSM, creating the DTM, is then applied in a semi-automatic way to LiDAR and IFSAR. So it's automatically fused, moved to this kind of homogeneous common basis, and then of course there is manual work included as well as for the editing, that someone's checking the overlaps and is defining for the process how actually the overlaps needs to be handled in order to make it really homogeneous data set.
So to do that for Europe is much different than doing that for part of a river in Australia.
Yes.
And it's a lot of work.
And I'm just coming to that. I have heard yesterday that UK is one of the examples you have been working with in terms of how the European markets are actually handling flood insurance. So I'm not going to talk about flood insurance, but the flood hazard mapping for the UK. And actually, we did this country mapping as the first in Europe. So it was 2003. We did the first national elevation data set for the whole of UK. And of course, government and the Environment Agency, in a few years, I think it started in 2007 or 2008, they started to collect LiDAR data, which is from helicopter or from aircraft, collecting very small pieces of accurate data sets. And we actually worked with them and had an agreement that we can use the LiDAR data set and fuse it in our next map data and use that for flood modeling purposes. So what you see here is actually the status before end of 2011. So over 4 or 5 years, Environment Agency has been having aircraft flying and collecting data, and we have been consistently updating the Nextnode data set. So the blue color represents the LiDAR coverage. And what that means, all the along the rivers, urban areas, and industrial commercial areas are covered by LiDAR, and the rest of the country, where there is not that much of value and assets, is covered with ICLR, because that's good enough and it works. And flying LiDAR would be too expensive and too time consuming, so it's just left at this stage. So to demonstrate how it works, let me go into this one directly, is again LiDAR data set, which is not covering everything. There are small holes, and if there is no river or village, it's just not covered. And this cannot be efficiently used for the national scale flat modeling, because it's patchwork. And what we did, we used the ICLR as basis and fused in the LiDAR. So then you have a very homogeneous, consistent data set, which is 5-meter posted, so it's from there to there. Every 5-meter is measurement. The accuracy is around half a meter at 60 centimeters, which means that we also resampled the LiDAR data to have this very homogeneous data set. So this is the, I would say, elevation data part of the story. And now what I would like to do is jump a little bit into hazard mapping, because that's one of the important or key usages we see for the elevation data set. And just to start off, let's talk about what's the hazard, what does this mean for everyone, because I was once walking in Bermuda, and I have seen hazard of falling coconuts. I said, okay, that's flood conference here. Okay, how that works. So everyone understands hazard a little bit different way, and if we want to, for our purposes today, talk about hazard, let's define it. There are several perils which are, I would say, influenced, and mapping understanding of those perils can be influenced by using elevation data set. Flood is one of them, let's keep that aside. Windstorm, that's another one. Here it is more the European windstorm, because it's not the climate or the hurricane type of approach, but understanding how the European windstorm can actually be influenced by hills and terrain and buildings, how this creates the turbulences and so on. So elevation data can help also there. Hailstorm, DTM is not that much efficient, but earthquake, a little bit more in the connection to landslides, because landslides can be driven by water, rain, or a little bit of earthquake as well. And of course, the man-made hazards like chemical dispersion and all that stuff, a little bit of influence if elevation data are used is there, but I would say it's on the lowest level. And just to have this feeling, if we are talking about hazard, what this can be. Let's focus on flood and talk about some of the drivers and motivations, because if we talk about flood water, what does it mean? There is rainfall, we have various types of flooding, and we also have intensity and frequency. And of course, what you have seen in Canada, in North America, what we have seen in Europe, and also in Southeast Asia, there are many events, flood events. The losses are increasing. So Jens Melhorn yesterday presented the curve, which is, I would say, dramatic, because the insured and uninsured loss is actually growing over the years significantly. So there needs to be something done about that. And from our perspective, we have been also doing some studies, what's the frequency and actually the impact of climate change. This was done by the European Commission Joint Research Center, and they have been trying to understand if they take 100-year return period flood as the basis, how is actually Europe looking? And they put this scale in, which shows that if 100-year flood is today, how is this changing if the frequency is increasing or decreasing? So if you take, for example, this purple, and you see those regions, that means that in those regions, the 100-year flood event is becoming 50-year. So we see the frequency is increasing, and we are seeing much more of flood events. And also another issue is the intensity of those events. So let's talk about the type of flooding. If we have a rainfall somewhere, the water is coming to the river, and then the river system is taking the water away. The level or the flow in the river is increasing, and at a certain point, water goes over the banks and is overtopping and flooding, inundating the surrounding areas. This is what we call flood or riverine flood, river flood, and it's usually described by hazard maps which look like this map here. So we have flood outlines which are defining areas with a certain return period or probability of being flooded once in many years, or 50 years, 100 years, 1,000 years. Another perspective on river flooding is actually depth of flooding. So if you are interested in information that there is flooding once in 50 years, you are also from the damage perspective and loss perspective interested what's the water depth. Because it's different if you have 15 centimeters of water and you have 3 meters, because the loss is completely different. So if we are doing this type of study and hazard map, the information about water depth, that is important. Let's move to other types of flooding, because river flooding has been mapped and worked with over the last years. But what we have seen in Europe is actually increase of heavy rain, or how we call it pluvial events. This means that we are not mapping the flow in the river, but, and I think I have heard that you call it urban flood. So that's very much similar. Rivers are not considered in that exercise, and we are just taking the rain and seeing how the rain and the water is actually leaving the territory before it hits the river. And it's then looking like that. You have map of city, and you have, I would say, the flood outlines as well. I will have some examples, real examples for you later on. And of course, depth of flooding is important as well. So now we have river, we have urban or pluvial, and the third component is actually storm surge or tidal or this tsunami wave. That's all linked, and it's the coastal problem where you do the modeling by increasing the level of the sea, and you are modeling the inundation of the certain meters or kilometers of the land. And last thing, which is still, I think, important for especially the industrial areas, is a very detailed study, because if you have, and there are special companies or insurance companies specializing in this, like FM Global is claiming that they do very detailed studies for industrial areas, and it's more concerning the specific commercial building and doing the analysis for that, not the large scale and then plugging it in the large scale perspective. Let's see some real examples. So river flooding. This is a simulation which we have been doing together with the UK-based company Ambiental Technical Solutions. They are professional flood modelers or hazard modelers. And this actually is showing a progress of a river flood event. And the colors are actually, the colors are coding the risk rating, which is actually based on water depth in that specific territory. So you can see that flood has been progressing, and now this is turned into a risk map. Let's see another example. This is London. The previous was Germany, actually. This is London and Wembley Stadium, and you can see progress of pluvial event. So there is a rainfall, and you see that there are some hotspots which are not that obvious from map. From from river flood mapping, it won't be obvious as well because there is no channel, no river. But still, here we will have at least 5 or 6 houses which will be flooded. And we did some comparison and have been comparing those data sets in the city of Hull, north part of the UK, and it very much is aligned with the historically observed pluvial flood events. And last thing, simulation of coastal surge event. This is Miami, Florida, and you can see how the water is actually propagating. And the difference between the previous two and this one is actually that we used also building outlines. So we have been using the terrain model, but later in the process we put buildings back in to see how the water will be actually going through the streets. Yes, please.
Does any of the modeling consider soil types or infrastructure, sewer systems, capacity?
It does. Definitely soil systems, because if you are doing the modeling for, let's say, urban areas, you need to put in the information that it's concrete, paved roads, parking lots, so all that is in. If we do the large-scale modeling, it's usually, I would say, there are some assumptions and groups of soils, so we do not do that for specific cells in the model, but it's done for regions. So you have urban area, then you are going out, so you assume that it's more fields and agriculture, environment, so this type of assumptions.
What about close to river systems? Is there a greater resolution of soil types along the banks or within the floodplains of?
Not in the national scale models, but if there is a need for improving, let's say, small part of the modeling, then this is possible to be included. The issue is that as I started to talk about the challenges, we have been always trying to, in first round, provide the national perspective. And then, once you understand a little bit the distribution and accumulations and all that stuff, you can try to work and improve the data, the hazard map for highly populated or urban areas or commercial areas. And you can do more detailed local studies, or even include sometimes a piece of let's say 3 kilometers of river, which is covered by a very detailed flood map, which was provided by the owner of the commercial property. Because sometimes they do this mapping. The same applies for government, because sometimes water management authorities are doing very detailed geodetically measured studies, and it's better to include them rather than do modeling again.
If I can just build on that, in cases where soil data mapping exists, Canada has some of that, that can be integrated into the modeling?
Yes, yes. have it here is actually to demonstrate the positive and negative impact of hazard mapping and not mapping to the insurance industry, because you have a detailed study or elevation data used for the modeling on that side, and this is using a coarse data set which has not been updated. And what can be the impact actually? If you see here those red areas, you see that the less detailed elevation data set has been actually creating less opportunities for you as insurers to write business, because you do not want that much of business here in those areas because it's exposed to flood. But in reality, it's actually something what we should be looking for, because there is no risk. Maybe the others who are using this type of information do not know it, and it's a growth opportunity. It's potentially safe business which can balance the portfolio. On the other hand, if you see this part of the town, the course model probably had some bridge or road left in, or some infrastructure which actually blocked the water. And therefore, this seems to be very safe, but in reality, if the water goes under the bridge and propagates down the, or upstream, it actually gets all flooded and it's high-risk area. So you need to understand that from the underwriting perspective, and you see the impact of detailed study. So let's quickly look at some of the examples in Europe. We have been, as I mentioned, Ambiental Technical Solutions is one of our partners. Intermap has some flood modeling capabilities, but we are not saying that we are the experts. We have been historically experts in the data acquisition, the elevation data acquisition, and I would say integration efforts and very large scale flood modeling. If it comes to more detailed studies, we usually partner with and we invite the professional modelers in the game. And actually in this case, we have been working with JBA Consulting from the UK, and also Guy Carpenter as representative of the insurance market. And we used the elevation data set for whole France, which was a huge data set, and we created the flood model for river flooding. What you see here is actually, I would say, the analogy to the pillow, which I have been showing some time ago. And you see that there are parts of the country mapped in very detail, and other parts of the country are not mapped, actually. So there is huge inconsistency in the reliability of the model. Also, the coverage, you have only the huge river here and not really connected small rivers here, so it's inconsistent. What we applied was a homogeneous approach, which actually resulted in consistent coverage of the whole country and increased the reliability of that information significantly. So that's one example of nationwide mapping. Another example is the UK, which I've been showing you the data fusion. What we did actually in the UK together with Ambiental has been covering all the three components of flood issues: river flooding, fluvial, and coastal as well. It's island, so coastal was needed as well. And I would say that this UK, we call it UK flood map, and it's, I would say, very comprehensive approach in mapping and understanding the flood hazard. It's used by insurers and some other users at the end, and it contains river flood zones and fluvial flood zones, which are having a return period of 100, 250, 500, and 1,000 years. And also 75 years and 50 years have been included in an update because I think 75 years is the limit which is defined by the Insurance Association for the UK insurers to be the boundary of the high-risk zone and the lower risk zone. So they consider 75 years flood zone to be kind of critical. In other countries, it's different. For example, Czech Republic is using 20 year. So everything what's in 20-year return period is high risk. What's outside can be insured. Yes, question.
How long does it take you to gather the elevation data for, let's say, one particular country? I guess it depends on the size, but let's say, because Canada is pretty big, Ontario is basically half of Europe, so how long would it take you, let's say, for Britain to get all the elevation data in?
Do you have, David, the statistics for the U.S.? Because I think it took us 3 years to do the U.S.
It took us 3 years to do the entire continental U.S. So that would be a frame of reference for that.
If we talk about the UK, it was our first European data set, and I think it was done in less than a year, including all the processing and all that stuff. The technology was advancing, so now if we are talking about acquisition of around 100,000 square kilometers, we are talking about 3 months, 4 months time period. And I think it's a good question because, as I said earlier, we do not want to do something what has been already done. So if the question is how quickly can be Canada mapped, I think the first question is what does already exist, what's available. Do we need to really collect the elevation data for the whole country, or do we put our focus on areas where there is very old data set available and we need to get update, or there is no good coverage? And I would probably suggest to not even map some of the northern parts of Canada in the first round, because the cost-benefit ratio won't be very positive.
Right.
So this type of thinking needs to be done before we would be starting the discussion about how long does it take. First question would be what needs to be mapped.
Definitely Manitoba first.
When combining data sets like your IFSAR and your LiDAR data sets and maybe other data sets that you've got already done, how do you handle the error factors? Because normally when you combine two different data sets, you either add or multiply the error depending upon which is greater because of potential differences between the sets. But you've put both of them together there and combined and merged them. I was just wondering how you deal with those error factors.
I'm not sure exactly what you are asking for. I mean,
you've got one error data set that is an error of half a meter.
Yes.
And then another one that's a meter.
Yes.
Now, you'd normally add those together, so over to all, the net error of the final data set combined is 1.5 meters. But you're actually merging this and doing a lot of work, so that may mitigate that. So I'm just wondering how exactly are you handling putting those error factors together?
The least accurate data set will be the driver there, because it controls what you're sampling. So if you've got LiDAR that's 1 meter posted data, and you're merging it with IFSAR that's 5 meter posted, the whole thing will be 5 meter posted.
Okay.
But the benefit is that you're able to, first of all, you're able to incorporate the two and get more uniform coverage. But you're also able to, frequently LiDAR will, because it's in isolated comparative postage stamp size areas, you're able to tie it into a much larger data set and increase the overall accuracy of it. Because if it's out there isolated as one little small area, it could frequently have, problems with the data set because of its isolation.
From the data specification perspective, we are still keeping the specification tied to the IFSAR data set because of the resampling and all that stuff.
Okay.
But we know that statistically in those areas where we fuse the products, the accuracy actually has been increased significantly and reliability of the data. But from the spec perspective, we keep it with IFSAR. One more comment before. And the resampling, actually, what David mentioned, is very interesting and key, actually, for, let's say, efficient processing of the data later on for running the flat models, because you won't be able to run flat modeling for whole state using LiDAR, because so huge data set that the flat modeling tools would just not be able to process them. So from our perspective and experience, the 5-meter posted elevation data is just on the edge. If it gets more high resolution, it's just not possible to be used. And some of the modelers, like JBA for example, they would prefer to use 10-meter, not 5. So they even would degrade a little bit the elevation data in the first round.
The other thing is, not always, but frequently LiDAR data sets are not what's called hydro-enforced. And on the ISAR data, we make sure that it's all hydro-enforced, and this means that the streams are all connected, the water all flows downhill as it should, and we edit out any bridges that may appear as artificial barriers to flood modeling software. So that you don't have...
the final drainage basin makes sense.
Exactly. So if the water goes where it will naturally.
Can I ask, Chair, in the UK, the government has worked to provide a elevation mapping that can be used by all the insurers, and the insurers in return have committed that for all homeowners outside of the 75-year floodplain, they guarantee the coverage will be provided if they buy fire insurance to get flooding. Yet there are some insurance companies in the UK who have chosen to purchase their own flood maps. So there is a map available to the whole industry, but they've chosen to do their own. Can you share why they would have gone to that extra expense?
Environment Agency has been historically doing own flat mapping, and it was the first map available, I would say, for the market, for the industry. But already early in the process, there have been insurers deciding it's not enough. We need more. We are not just happy with having this yes and no answer. We need more detailed understanding, because if you do yes and no and apply that to few billion portfolio, the difference is actually huge, or the impact of classifying this as a exposed and this as not exposed. So there was a pressure, and I think Aviva, Norwich Union, that time was the first company who actually started own flat modeling. So they really took the elevation data, hired consultants, and created own map, which was having specific parameters, not linked to the market, but specifically for Aviva. And later on, there have been 2 other initiatives coming up. JBA, one of our partners, did some sort of flat modeling as well. They have been coming more from the civil engineering perspective, and it was adding additional information to the Environment Agency data. And what we did with Ambiental was actually taking very detailed elevation data, fusing LiDAR in, and running the flat modeling for all the 3 components of flat. And this seems to be the most up-to-date and most detailed flat model, which covers all the 3 components. And there are already adopters and insurers using that. So I think the quick answer would be that every insurer, and also the market in the UK, is the most competitive I've ever seen, because really insurers are doing own analysis, understanding exactly what it has, what type of impact it has on the portfolio and on reinsurance programs and all that stuff. And they are actually selecting not what's the standard solution, but what actually fits the purpose of that insurer, which is not necessarily the case in the other countries.
I was just going to ask, you said that if the enormous amount of information provided by LiDAR was actually fed into the flood models, they would not be able to compute.
Right.
Is that a hardware like runtime limitation, or?
Yes. It's hardware and runtime limitation because the UK flood map has been developed over, I think, 7 or 8 months using a few thousand computers. And it has been using 5-mirror posted DTM. If you take, for example, France as a case, this was done by JBA using 10-mirror posted elevation dataset 2.5, 3 years ago, and it has been using around 30,000 graphical processing units. And I think it's just the hardware limitation. If we would be talking about data volumes, we are talking about terabyte units of terabytes for the 5-mirror post data set. If you talk about LiDAR, it's usually 1 mirror posted, so it's 5 by 5 more, which is 25 times more data, and that's difficult to handle.
So the resolution limitation is the size of the grid, not the error term?
Yes, correct.
Many areas, especially in England, as it's smaller than here, but even here, say in Toronto, have had a fair amount of surveying done starting going back to a very manual basis, the old way of doing things. How does your accuracy compare to that, to the stuff that went before, essentially? So if you went into London, central London, along the Thames, which has had a lot of surveying work done on it, how would your work compare to that?
There are 2 answers to that. First of all, I already mentioned that the surveyed data sets are usually more accurate because you really have people going to the field and measuring, and the accuracy can go to centimeters if they have a concrete thing which they can reference to. It's highly accurate. So we cannot compete with this type of accuracy, but on the other hand, they are missing the context. And what we have been always doing is, because if you do a flat model, it's a mathematical statistical approach which needs some calibration and needs the cross-check with the reality. So if you do any flat model, you need historically observed data or surveyed data or claims data or whatever is available, what can help to calibrate the model and tie down to a real event or real situation. So the survey data in many cases are used for this type of calibration. So we run the model, we have the first result done, and then there are several rounds of calibrating. So we take historically observed data, measured data, information from water management authorities, and we try to make sure that the model actually fits and works with those observed information.
So you're using the observed information as a check on the actual...
Yes. Because you do not want to completely change the model. At a certain point, you want to have the reliability of the model consistent across the whole territory. So a few more words on the type of modeling, and now I will be a little bit moving towards actually understanding the loss and trying to do probabilistic modeling, because what we have been talking about up to now was the static hazard mapping, which means understanding what's the outline of event if it has a return period of 50 years, for example. So it's outline static map. But there is another approach which is called event model or catastrophic model, which is taking it from different perspectives. It's not statically mapping what is the flood extent, but it's simulating rain event and checking what actually is happening in the territory. So you take a rainfall and you simulate how the water actually leaves the territory. So those are flood events. And for those models, you usually run, for example, 100,000 various events, which are based on historically observed data or meteorological simulations and models and rainfall models. And the reason for doing that is actually that you can then understand what's the probability of loss, because for those static models, which we have been talking up to now, you can understand what the risk, if the location is exposed to flood or not. If you use the other approach, you can answer question, what's the probability of me as insurer to see a loss of 2 billion? Is it 20 years, 50 years, or 100 years? So the question is different for those two types of approaches. And in order to be able to do this type of analysis, always you need to understand the location of the property or the risk you are evaluating. So any time you start to think about risk, the location is key. So very exact and accurate location of the risk is key in the whole process. Once you have the location, you can do visualization, analysis, checking how it looks against the flood zones, what's the exposure, and so on. And at the end, you can do some statistical analysis and reports using this type of data. Just to demonstrate the importance of exact location of the risk, you can see that there are some risks located close to the river, and we understand that it's closer here, and we can work with the exact location. In case where we only know that the risk is actually on that street, we do not have very good understanding if it is here in the flood zone or actually outside the flood zone. So if we have been working with insurers or telecommunication companies or commercial companies, we always try to help them to understand the exact location, because it actually ties to the elevation data. We have been always trying to say, yes, for the underwriting purposes, we can help with very detailed data set, elevation data, and actually the location needs to be the same accurate as the elevation. So I can, just as a nice example, this is a German flood model, and shows the detailed analysis of industrial risk. So there are some offices which are actually located very close to the river, and it's actually car manufacturer, and they are using that internally for, I would say, internal marketing before they decide to purchase building or do change in the portfolio. They are checking how it looks. And you can see different flood zones, different actually risk and intensity. And visually, you can support your decisions and see if you need to do some risk mitigation or not even move into those offices because there is a high risk. Or you just keep it for now but put it on the priority list in terms of getting rid of that from the portfolio. Okay. Few more words about the analysis, because we talked about those events, simulating hundreds, thousands of events. There is a simpler approach which still can be very helpful, very useful, and it's in between the hazard mapping, the static maps, and the detailed probabilistic approach, and it's a scenario analysis. So you can use those hazard maps in order to understand various scenarios and what's the impact actually to the assets. So you simulate flood events, let's say 50-year flood event. You can get list of properties which are actually affected by that, and you can work with that. And the reason why I'm talking about this is actually linked to, first of all, analysis and reports, so you can efficiently use the static maps to generate reports and understand, even from a, let's say, business perspective, if you are right in business as insurance company, you can see what's happening from yesterday compared to tomorrow, and what was the new business actually, what was the impact of the new business to the overall portfolio situation. And so this is the, let's say, reporting perspective, but what is more important is the overall exposure to the risk. So I think this is more the reinsurance story. It's called the loss exceedance curve, and it actually shows or demonstrates the answer to the first question I've been asking in relation to the event models. What is the probability of me seeing a loss of 35 million in my portfolio? And this type of curve actually shows that the probability is once in 200 years. And you can get this information based on the probabilistic model. Why I'm showing that is actually that if you use coarse data and bad or old information for the modeling, you actually get a huge gray zone, and you have no idea if your result is on this side of the gray zone or the other side, and the difference can be 20 million or 200 million depending on the size of the portfolio. And actually, if you use detailed input data and detailed modeling, you can manage to get the gray zone smaller. So all your plans, budgeting, reinsurance program, whatever, risk-adjusted capital, can be actually much more accurate and adequate to the situation in the portfolio. So this is a financial impact, I would say, of detailed topography at the beginning. And I would probably skip this one and just talk about early warning systems and ways how to predict, because we had the static hazard maps. We spent a few minutes talking about the probabilistic approach and understanding the financial loss or probability of financial loss. And this type of applications are actually trying to look into future. And the question is how far into future. It can be few hours or few days or 15 days, for example. And the goal for those early warning systems is actually, if there is rain somewhere in the country, you can actually measure what is the flow in the river. This is usually done by the local governments or water management authorities. And if you feed that into the flood model, you can actually predict what is going to happen. So you can see the rain event progress, and you can say that in 6 hours, if the predictions as provided by the Meteorological Institute will be true, the impact to my portfolio is 1 billion. Or if the predictions will not happen, and we will not be seeing the worst case scenario, but it will just increase slowly, the impact is very low and will just happen in certain parts of the country. So you can do this type of predictions and actually extrapolation of current weather forecasts. And what's the impact of doing that on running business? If you need to send people in the field to manage the claims and work with the people who are affected by the flood, you can much better understand how many people you need, when, what will be the loss, and how actually this can be managed from the operational perspective. So that's another type of application. And from Intermap perspective, I will just show you this as one of the most technical pictures, diagrams. And the reason for me having that here is actually showing that I've been talking about homogeneous data set as input to many applications. And what we believe is that if we have one data set, which is covering the whole territory and is homogeneous, there are many applications at the end which can be efficiently using this type of data for risk assessment, modeling, 3D view, telecommunication applications, and many other applications, even for advertisement and billboards. So all that can be linked to a elevation data set. And to give you one real example of how this application platform can be put into life or operation, I have been talking about France as an example of nationwide flood modeling. The UK, this is actually Czech Republic, where we have been very active since 1997, and we have been building flood models and studies over the years, because the Czech Republic has been hit into 1997 with first flood. In 2002, actually, Swiss Re was involved in the project as partner as well, and we have been developing some of the tools together. And this is one of the end user applications, which is a web portal for risk reporting. So you as a homeowner can go there, type down the address of your home, and you get a simple one-page report which says, this is the address, that's the location. Based on our flood model, the current rate or risk score is number 2 out of 4. And it shows you the map, some additional information, and you can print it out and take it to your bank if you need to get mortgage, or to the insurance company, or if you are selling the house, the buyer probably will get that. So this is a very simple end-user application, which actually is leveraging all the things which we have been talking about earlier. And once more, just a conclusion of some of the important points which I would like to summarize here. What we believe is that the homogeneous data sets as input for flood modeling are critical because of enabling production of more reliable hazard maps and risk assessment. It's important not only having single risk assessment done for property, but understanding that or on larger scale for states or even nationwide mapping is key, because we are living in more and more global world, so we need to be thinking also from the risk perspective more globally. And last comment is about the, let's say, general availability of that information for all the different industries, because I've been many times mentioning insurance industry, reinsurance, but telecommunication companies, industrials. We have clients also in telecommunication, and they are actually actively using this type of information to manage their operations. So it's not insurance purpose only, but understanding the risk and driving the business the way which is risk aware. So I've been talking about insurance, reinsurance, but it's more general. And with that, I would stop my talking. And if there are any questions, I think we can talk about those.
Now, the disaster and emergency management groups from the public side talk to you at all about this? Because this would be useful in terms of figuring out what they might have to deal with.
Not in Canada. We had some discussions in Central Europe with those authorities, and there are some links. I would say that the hazard maps are usually used as a emergency plans. So they plan which roads can be used, how the emergency plans can be built. And sometimes it's used for the early warning systems. Sometimes the early warning is based on the legislation dedicated to some government authorities, so no one is actually looking outside the government bodies to get this information because it's their legal responsibility. So there are some limitations in some countries. Yes.
Earlier in your talk, you mentioned that a 1 in 100 area might be changing to a 1 in 50.
Yes.
How do you decide that?
It's actually, again, modeling. I give you a real example what we did together with Allianz insurance company in northern Italy. We have been trying to run a study which includes hazard mapping based on elevation data. It was actually pluvial, so the heavy rain type of flooding. And then you create this map for today's situation, which means you are using historical records of rainfall for last 30, 40 years, whatever is available. It's usually this time frame. And then you take a global climate model and you try to extrapolate the rainfall information another 100 years. So you create artificially, based on a climate change model, a series of information for the next 100 years. And then you do the modeling again for time frame 30 plus another 20. You add another 50 years. So you do several rounds of the modeling. And then you see that the flat outline here is of that size. In 50 years, it's actually bigger. And in 100 years, it's not necessarily bigger, which was actually the outcome, but you see that the intensity a little bit decreased, but the frequency was increasing. And you do the analysis of those time, let's say, spans or slots, and you define the return or period or the probability. Yes.
Your mapping tool seems very impressive, and certainly there's lots of information there that I'm sure every one of us here would like to use. But it seems to me from your presentation that your intent is not to provide maps that are going to be available to the general public, but to provide special interest maps that each one of us might be willing to pay for individually. Is that sort of your game plan?
There was no game plan, actually.
Don't let me put words in your mouth, but I think I know the gist of my question.
The presentation today was, I tried to give you the overview, whatever we have been seeing and doing, what links to the topography and can help manage, mitigate, and understand the risk. So there was no intent of proposing any project. And based on the experience working in various countries, it's really going from the extreme situation where government is actually funding creation of the basic map, and then various industries are just a little bit modifying the maps in order to fit their purpose or need. Compared to the other extreme situation, like in the UK, different example because it's typically the environment agency data set. But Czech Republic or Slovakia, in those countries, the flood mapping initiatives have been funded privately, so insurers have agreed on a standard approach and funded that without government because, how to put that politically correct, I think they said we do not want to wait another 10 years, we need that now. Okay. Because we had the losses. We need to understand it.
Yeah, well, I guess, right now here in Canada, like if you go to Alberta, right, you can go onto some website and you can see the flood zones that have been mapped for the province of Alberta. Now, presumably, you could improve their maps considerably using what you've done. So have you had discussions with those people in Alberta as how you can improve their maps? And then more interest us is, have you had discussions with entities in other provinces how you could provide that level of mapping available to the public?
We're just beginning this process, so.
And you did mention that you've done the whole United States, right?
Yeah.
So I think it'd be really interesting to see how your maps differ from the FEMA maps, because I suspect you found some surprising differences.
Well, in fact, our data is used in some cases to generate the FEMA maps. We're doing a number of counties in Michigan, for example. We're using our data to do the mapping.
Actually, talking about the U.S. approach, we have not been running our own flood modeling because FEMA data are available, and we have been agreeing with FEMA that our elevation data would be used by FEMA contractors to improve the FEMA map during the map modernization program. And it's still questionable because I think it's not homogeneous and a very efficient approach, but that's the U.S. situation. So we have not been doing flood modeling on our own in the U.S.
When you mapped the U.S., was your client FEMA? Is that who you were doing it for?
We did it. We raised some money through venture capital and did it, archived the entire country, and we're reselling it out of archive.
Okay.
So actually, the FEMA contractors have access to our web-based web store. We call it web store, and they can actually go there based on the contracts they have from FEMA, download the data they need and process them and work with them. So it's actually happening without us. It's on demand.
And then that produces a publicly available flood map for that area where they're working.
Yes.
There's a whole variety of different models.
I just wanted to make, to address a bit of your question. David and I will be meeting in Ottawa on Monday with a couple directors from NR Canada with regards to a BC project as well as possibly Quebec and Manitoba and other areas. And one of the things, I don't want to speak out of turn, but one of the things this is, if we can get the federal government on board, the insurance companies on board, telecommunications, it's global, more support from the different applications, and insurance and reinsurance being one of them, helps to push the federal government to say, hey, we need to do this as a federal program. Who wants to buy in? So one of these is, if we can get this going, here are some of the applications that'll be good for your industry as well. And, is there support and that type of thing for it? So, like, there's, like, Ivo was saying, there was no agenda in this. It's, here's the technology, and can the insurance industry benefit from a national program if we can get the federal government or the provincial government and get the state raised?
And, well, I guess there's a lot of competition here. I mean, you said in your presentation, a lot of your work was areas where there's a lot of cloud cover. And, some of the planes that fly over using photography that need cloud-free days to work. My impression is, though, that although you have to wait for a nice day, the resolutions they can get are actually better than what you're claiming, which might be a better way to go for Manitoba.
What you're talking about, an image versus elevation data, they're two separate things.
Are they?
Yeah.
Oh.
No, absolutely, modern digital cameras using reflected energy off the surface on a cloud-free day, you can get very, very high resolution, beautiful color photography. But it's a different application.
But I'm under the impression, I'm not the expert, that there are photographic techniques that do allow you to get digital information. But
yeah,
maybe
it's called photogrammetry, and you're taking images from two slightly different perspectives, and just like with your eyes are apart, and you're able to detect the difference. You're further away than the wall is, or the wall's further away than you are, and it's the same process, and you can extract elevation information that way, but that's a much more expensive approach. Our whole system is geared towards covering very, very large areas, doing it efficiently, and essentially doing countrywide coverages that wouldn't be affordable otherwise. It's kind of, it's not the most accurate solution, but it's a solution that's affordable and optimized for this particular application.
But I think, especially talking about photogrammetry, we had discussions with various providers of that, let's say, technology. And I think the result was that ICLR, the radar approach, is significantly more efficient and provides the better results in terms of the bare earth model, which is used for the flat modeling, because from these sterile pairs, you have some difficulties to remove some of the obstacles and artifacts from the elevation data, which are created through the photogrammetric approach. So actually, we have been trying to get some projects going in order to help those providers to improve the elevation data.
And our elevation data is frequently used in combination with newly acquired high-resolution photography to produce what's called ortho photos. I'm doing a project now in the western U.S. where we're using that approach to lay out the preliminary design and planning and environmental part of a major transmission line, about 1,600 miles long.
In one of your earlier slides where you showed your plane, it looked like it was like a modified Learjet or something.
Exactly.
Right? Is that what you use? So you can cover a lot of ground with that, I guess.
Yeah.
And how many planes do you have?
We currently have 3, but you're absolutely right. In the process of doing the U.S., we greatly refined the whole process of acquiring the data, made it much more efficient. In fact, their absolutely most efficient way of collecting data is to take off and fly a flight line that's 1,400 kilometers long, turn the plane around, come back and fly a parallel flight line 1,400 kilometers long, and then land for fuel. Because turning a Learjet around is a...
And upload in the data.
Yes.
How wide are you getting when you make a pass? What's the width?
Well, it depends on the altitude, but I think it's about 14 kilometers. And there's a certain amount of overlap between flight lines. So it's not site-specific data collection. It's very much oriented toward large areas.
Scale, yes. Yes, please.
I missed probably some very critical minutes at the beginning of this meeting. Sorry to have been late. But just to be clear, you are providing maps only? Like you showed some simulated pluvial events over urban centers. Is that your service? Like
you have seen the tag of ambient technical solutions.
Yes.
So those guys are doing the site-specific surveys as well. Or there are other companies like Atkins or PDS&J in the US who are focusing on the site-specific simulations. What is our approach is, and it's linked to the large-scale mapping. We said nationwide mapping should be the smallest thing we do.
not for Canada though.
Yes.
It's a big nation.
Yeah, as I said, the northern part probably does not need that much of attention in the first round. Or it can be done using lower resolution elevation data, using free data sets, for example, just to spot some of the potentially risky areas with the coarse approach, and then focus on those only. So there are ways how this can be handled.
The vast majority of as I'm sure you're aware, the vast majority of the population in Canada is concentrated along a band that's about 300 miles north of the U.S. border. And so if you concentrated the mapping based on where the population was and the need, you dramatically reduce the amount of area you need to cover to address the needs of the vast majority of the population.
Sorry, so you don't work on the runoff or drainage patterns of the events. You're providing the input.
We provide the data
Okay.
to support the models. Yes.
Okay.
And then we, in some cases, invite partners to derive the hazard map we provide some of the exposure modeling and flood exposure management tools. That's what we do in some of the markets. And of course, the web-based, we call it 3D BI, 3D business intelligence applications to use the information efficiently and get the value out of the data set. So that's what we are doing.
Okay. Thank you. I just have like a million questions, and many of them relate to the, most of them relate to the modeling, not necessarily probabilistic, but even like a specified event situation. And I won't ask those, that's not your thing, so.
And if I can generalize as well, ICLR is always looking for advice about the kind of people you'd like to hear from. So when we put out our paper a year ago about making flood insurable, we had a lot of questions about national maps. And these are the best people in the world, so we had them come and tell you about national maps. But if your question is different, then tell us what your key question is, and we'll try to find you the best and let you talk to them.
I must say that I thoroughly enjoyed the presentation. I'm not disappointed. I just want to make sure I'm asking the right questions to the right people, that's all.
And we're not afraid to tell you we don't know something. Or don't do something, so. Yes.
Sometimes the artifacts are pretty important, like the bridges, which are, may cause an ice dam, which is a particular Canadian exposure.
I know, yeah.
So, do you have any response to that, or?
What we usually do is, for the modeling, you need to have a continuous drainage. So we usually carve a not very wide opening in the bridge that we can make the water flow. But we keep the rest of the bridge there, and this is used, or this creates the blockage. If you are modeling flows which are bigger than, which means it's overtopping, then the remainder of the bridge is actually a plain arrow. We haven't been doing so far this type of blockage modeling, but it definitely can be done because, again, the partner who worked with us, Ambiental, they are doing dam, bridge modeling and all that, I would say more site-specific analysis, and this bridge blockage is one of those. So it can be modeled, yes, but not on the national scale, because that's different type of question.
Last question, so draw things to a close.
So with the recent floods in Thailand and the impact on the global supply chain, have you seen increased interest in your products?
Yes, I have seen. I'm still jet lagged because I was almost directly coming from Bangkok. Yes, there is significant interest, and I think the primary driver for that is actually industry, because they have been so heavily affected that they are even thinking about relocating and leaving Thailand, which is putting enormous pressure to the government, because it's a huge income for the country and employs a lot of people. So there are various discussions going on, and I think there are some countries which are proposing kind of support to Thailand and providing, for example, free assets which would be acquired over the affected areas in order to enable flood modeling quickly. But of course, what we are interested in is the not necessarily nationwide, but at least modeling and mapping, which would be done for the main catchment and for the whole catchment, because it's important to understand exactly how the water behaves in the catchment area. So the answer is yes, there is a lot of discussions going on and interest as well.
Last question from Daryl, and then we'll close.
Which one? The you've used your data as archives, which you're selling off, and so some people or some agencies have created flood maps, for example. Which is it possible for you to give us a list of websites of companies that have used your information to make flood maps that are available out there for us? Or do we have to go and?
Certainly happy to provide that information.
You mean, in general?
Well, in Czechoslovakia or the Czech Republic, for example, you said the government has done it, and the people there can go on and see if their house is in the flood zone or not. Or
Government is still working on that for next 10 years, probably.
but that. But I understood that. Well, maybe it wasn't freely available. Maybe it's available to those people for a fee.
There's two different models that have gone on in the U.S. For example, some of the FEMA contractors have used our data to do flood mapping on counties. I mentioned Michigan and a couple other places, and they generate publicly distributed flood maps. In other cases, it's an industry-driven effort just to provide better information for their decision making, and in at least at a couple of conversations about that, it's provided that industry with pretty decent return on investment, so they've been happy they did it.
Yeah, well, I guess our challenge is here. There's especially in Canada, flood maps are available or not available from a variety of sources, and when someone asks, is this here in a flood zone? It's not an easy question to answer because it's a lot of research just to even figure out where the best map can come from, right? And then you have to figure out how you're going to get that map, right? So if you had a list of saying, here, these are the companies that have the best available maps based on our data, and if you need it, you can go to them, and whether it's free or whether there's a fee, that's kind of a minor nature, but at least if we know where to go for the best map, that's a head start.
And just a question.
Well,
Are you interested in Canadian data?
No, global. Sure.
Okay.
We can certainly provide you with information where we've.
I'm working on projects all over Europe all the time, and people say, are they in a flood zone? I said, well, if it's in France, or if it's in Germany, or if it's in Belgium, or Denmark.
We can provide you with that information.
We can do that, and the reason is that part of our company strategy is integration and dissemination, what our CEO is usually saying as opening thing, which means that we are trying to integrate also the best available data, not necessarily create. So if you think about Europe, we probably would be able to kind of give you access to flood maps from majority of the countries, and not necessarily the government, because they are not always willing to share it, and it's sometimes only in paper form, so there might be various limitations.
And Aviva might not want to share their map with me either, right? But
yes, correct.
But presumably there are lots that you know of that would be willing to share, and it would just be, I don't know, if there was a short way to get that information to us, that would be helpful.
Okay, with that, I'm going to close today. We had a number of requests for information about flood mapping, so I hope this session was useful to you. If I can remind people that our next scheduled Friday Forum is Friday, March 9th, and we had a team go to golf after the tornado, so Goderich after the tornado, and one of the engineers as part of the team is going to come and talk about some of what she saw and some of the damage that occurred after the touchdown. So that's March 9. For those joining us on the webinar today, thank you for joining us, and this regularly. Please think about coming to the office here, and then you can actually ask your questions and interact directly with the speakers. But we're pleased we can at least make it available to others, and I know there's many joining in today electronically to hear part of what was presented. So thank you for joining us, and look forward to future events. But can you please thank our speakers. David's come all the way from Seattle to be here today, and Ivo all the way from Munich just to come in and share all of this information. So please, our thanks to David and to Ivo. Close, and there's a chance to ask a couple more questions if anybody wants to before we're done. Mark, can I get you to hang up? Yeah.